Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Killer Ideas for Delivering Successful Projects. This webinar was taken from the book Over 50 Killer Ideas for Delivering Successful Projects by Richard Morreale. I'll talk a little bit more about him in a moment. Okay, so like our regular webinars in this series, we're going to run for about 45 minutes or so and have some time for question and answer. I do want to point out that this is the first webinar in a two-part series. The second one, more killer ideas for delivering successful projects, will be delivered in 2 weeks' time. Okay, my name's Kevin Aguanno. I'm a project manager. I've been in the community, the project management community, for over 30 years. Lots of certifications to my name. I don't even list them all on this slide. A lot of traditional project management and agile project management certifications. I've worked across multiple industries. I've worked for public sector and private sector clients. I've worked for nonprofit. I've worked in IT, engineering, construction, business process change, organizational transformations, mergers and acquisitions, all kinds of different types of projects, R&D, right? And I've written over 30 books on project management related topics, and I teach it at the university level. So a little bit about me there. Let me tell you about Richard Morreale. Jake, or Richard Morreale, sadly passed away in 2021, but he was a world-class project manager. I had the pleasure of knowing him and the pleasure of publishing 2 of his books. He was a very seasoned project manager who started off in the US working as a clerk and worked his way up to being in charge of the change control board for the large NASA Apollo space program. He was actively managing parts of the project that put a man to the moon and got him back again, as he liked to say. Then he moved to the UK and computerized the UK tax system for the first time so people could do taxes online and etc. And then he did a lot of major transformation work in policing and security services, computerizing some of their operations. Before he went to the UK, he was working extensively in Washington, D.C. on government projects as well. Plenty of experience on extremely huge projects with budgets in the hundreds of millions or billions of dollars. He's also a very well-known keynote speaker. He's a member of the National Speakers Bureau in the USA. He loved to tell stories and fill his presentations with lots of humor and examples from his real-world projects. He was known for his humor and his light attitude towards life, and it was a loss when he passed. Anyway, based on the books that he published, as I said, one of them is 50 Killer Ideas for Delivering Successful Projects. I've prepared this presentation. Now, one of the things Jake liked, or Richard Morreale liked to talk about, is that project success isn't hard. It's actually soft. Now, what does that mean? Well, he tells an interesting example. There were some studies done in the 1970s that looked at project success rates, and the numbers came back that about 90% of projects were successful, meeting the overall objectives, generally falling within the success parameters established by the stakeholders. People thought, let's see if we can improve that. So people spent a lot of time trying to, because still 10% of projects failing is pretty bad. So let's spend some money on development and processes and formalization. And another study was done in the 1990s, and success rates were still about 90%. So people put more pressure and investment in, actually, I think the number was 86%. People put more investment in project management development, and in the 2000s, the number was still, in the early 2000s, still about 90%. So, and another study was done recently in the 2010s, and it was still in the neighborhood of 90%. I think anywhere between 84 and 92% are what these studies are coming out at. So this just tells us that what we're doing isn't working. The development focus that we're putting on tends to be on the hard skills. Well, if people are, if we can't seem to impact project management success rates, maybe we need to teach them more about estimating and scheduling and stakeholder management, and we need to talk more about procurement management and managing risks and all of those hard skills of project management, the technical skills of project management. But maybe it's not those things at all. Richard said it's probably the soft skills that make the biggest difference. The behaviors and traits and personality elements that make a successful project manager. PMI also echoes this. In one of their Pulse of the Profession reports on navigating complexity, they came out with this interesting statistic based on their study. The skills that are needed to manage the most complex projects successfully are leadership skills. They're saying the biggest, hardest projects need leadership, the soft skills, not the technical skills, not the strategic and business management skills. Success comes from those soft skills. So they echo what Richard had been saying for years, is soft skills matter. So let's look at some of these tips from Richard on how to, make a killer ideas for delivering a successful project. Now, these are in no particular order. These are just some taken at random. He said, first off, foster a team atmosphere, right? Get a good sense of teammanship going. If people feel like they're part of a real team, they're more productive, they have more fun, they do better, they build better deliverables, and they're faster. Now, what makes a team a team, right? What makes them a high performance team? Well, they need to have a shared purpose, a common purpose. Give them all a common goal. Point the team towards that direction and measure their success as a group towards achieving that objective, right? Have them agree on their goals and objectives. Make them understand them clearly and have them all agree and buy into it. Make sure they understand their roles and responsibilities, what everybody's doing and what they're going to be measured on. Measure it carefully and share that information so people can see how they're doing as they proceed. Establish some ground rules within the team as well. Make sure everybody understands how they're going to work together as a team and how they're going to get along. Often there's something called a team operating agreement that many organizations produce at the start of a large project or a complex team structure. They prepare this team operating agreement that describes how they're going to work, how they're going to, is it majority rules? Are there certain people whose vote counts more? How is the team going to make decisions? How they're going to communicate? And what are the other ground rules as well? And lastly, celebrate successes as they proceed, as they hit milestones, as they accomplish things that they were aiming for. Celebrate the success so they see the rewards of working together better. It reinforces that sense of teammanship. So that's number one, foster a team atmosphere. Oh, and lastly, expect openness and honesty, right? Make sure everybody is not playing political games. They are open to working together as a group. Okay, the second one, lighten up. Richard says, have a sense of humor. Don't take yourself too seriously. Have some fun. We spend so much time at work focusing on trying to get business objectives done. Sometimes we lose our humanity. We're not robots. Have some fun. Understand that people make mistakes. People, have good days and bad days. So try and cheer them up. Try and make the workplace fun. If we're going to spend so much of our waking lives in the office, at least try to make the process enjoyable. Number three, establish a project lending library, right? Richard says, establish a library of books, videos, audiobooks, things like that people can borrow on the team on topics related to project management, on personal skills development, leadership skills, project management skills. Have some resources available that people can borrow, because as you're talking to them about improving their own performance, you may make some recommendations about a good book to read or something like that. Don't give people an excuse to say, oh, I didn't have it, or I didn't have time to go look for it on the library, or it was expensive on Amazon. Have it available, lend it out, get people to actually start building their own personal skills by reading and learning as they go. Richard believed in continuous lifelong learning and its tremendous impacts on how people perform. Every project with a detailed definition of the project, right? So if you're given a clear exactly what your objectives are, that should be your first task to try and clarify. If you have an unclear definition of what the project is trying to achieve, then it's easy for the project to get off track, to go in the wrong direction, to build the wrong thing, and encounter things like scope creep. So one of the very first things I try and do is get clarity on what it is that people are trying to achieve. So I was building a website one time for a major sports franchise, and the marketing team was really excited that the website needed to be, and this is their wording, needed to be kick-ass. Now I said to them, what does that mean? Kick-ass. I said, well, kick-ass, exciting, cool, great, amazing. I said, in whose judgment? Is it your judgment? No, the public's. Okay, so if I get 10 people from the public and they say it's good enough, is that going to be successful? It has to be the right 10. What if they agree on something silly? I said, great. So if you can't even agree on how we're going to decide if we're successful, if the project is kick-ass enough, if you can't even define what that is, how are we supposed to measure it? I said I could go to the legal definition, but my lawyers will tell me there's only one legal definition of kick-ass, and that's going to leave somebody with a bruise and not wanting to sit in a hard chair for a while. So you got to be very careful about clearly defining what the objectives are so we all know exactly what we're trying to achieve. Any kind of misunderstandings open opportunities for chaos and arguments and claims and lawsuits potentially from a project. So make sure we've got clear definition of what we're trying to achieve. Know our outcome before we start, right? Get an agreed to requirements document in place. So once we know the general objectives, get detailed requirements for exactly what we're trying to do on this project. Use some requirements elicitation techniques, and there's a few. One is you can interview individuals, get some people together and sit down individually with them and ask them, what do you need? What do you need this project to produce? And document it and ask questions and probe and get the details, write it all down, get that information down on paper so you don't forget. That's one thing, but it takes a long time. The more individuals that are providing you these requirements, the more opportunities also for conflicts and misunderstandings or disagreements. So that technique takes a long time and is open to lots of conflict when people give conflicting advice. Another technique might be doing a group workshop. So if you have a number of individuals to interview for their requirements, why don't you do it all as a group so they can hear each other's inputs? And if there is a contradiction, they can work it out right there on the spot and hopefully come to some kind of consensus on what the agreed to requirement is. So group workshops lead to much more efficiency, when you're trying to gather requirements from a group. Hold a visioning session sometimes. If people can't describe their requirements because they don't have enough understanding or detail yet, things aren't crisp enough, then hold a visioning session. Say to them, okay, so 2 years from now, after this project is done, what is it going to feel like when you walk into that new facility? What sounds are you going to hear? What smells are there going to be? What is your mood? What is your sense of, anticipation as you walk into the facility? What's going to catch your eye? And close your eyes and just envision you walking into that situation and tell me what that experience is. And from that envisioning exercise, you can often define the actual requirements themselves. Next, define the content and format standards of individual documents. We produce a lot of paperwork on projects, right? Projects produce tons and tons of paperwork. So never start writing a document without agreeing what needs to be in the document or the format that it's going to take. I've had people start working on, a business requirements document and they're producing it in PowerPoint. Well, I'm sorry, the organization has a Microsoft Word template standard. You're not following the standard. Or maybe they've put all the requirements in a spreadsheet. That's great. It seemed convenient for you at the time, but that doesn't follow our standards, or other people don't have the tools to read the spreadsheet. There may be standards you need to follow, but even more importantly, what's included and what's not. one of the things I like to do is agree on the table of contents, right? Before we start a document. Do a high level sketch of what the table of contents is, what's in and out of scope, and that will help us clarify what to put in the document so everybody has a clear understanding before they sit down and begin. Then get approval from the project board, the steering committee, the people in charge on the business side, the people who are funding the project, paying for the project, the ones giving business direction on the project. Present to them and get them to agree on the detailed or the high level project definition, the detailed requirements document, right? So there's absolute agreement. Get them to sign it. You sign it too. So it's a clear understanding of this is what we agreed we were trying to achieve. Then as you build up a high level project schedule and you get some key milestone dates that you've agreed on, you've got the budget that they've agreed to and other key documentation, get them to sign off on it and sign off on yourself as well. This gets senior management buy-in. It gets visibility to the management so they can see the big picture. They understand exactly what they're committing to or agreeing to, and it allows them to make better decisions because they can see the whole thing. Also, you'll have less resistance later when you're trying to push to make changes in the organization or get escalations or assistance to help you stick to that plan because they signed off on the plan. Theoretically, they at least understand the plan. Next, publicize the project goals and objectives. Don't just keep them in secret. Sometimes there are secret projects, right? You're doing work in security or intelligence. Sure, there are secret projects, but where possible, publicize that the project exists. Hey, everybody, we got a great new project. It's working to improve our operational efficiencies by replacing some of our old outdated equipment with modern equipment that can process things faster. That's the goal of our objective. We're going to call it the Speeder Up project, right? Come up with a project logo, come up with a model for the project, display it everywhere on posters and mugs and bookmarks. Do little bookmarks for people displaying the project goals. Maybe get a big wall poster and put them up around the office so to remind everybody about the project and what it's trying to achieve. That builds excitement. It keeps everyone focused, and focus is key. If we stay focused on the objectives, if we're constantly reminded of what the objectives are, we may not stray, right? So if everyone's focused on a common goal, then we can all achieve what we're looking for. But if we all have different visions or forget why we're doing something, it's easy to stray off in the wrong direction. Next, use workshops wherever you can, not just for gathering requirements, but when you're trying to communicate with people, get feedback from people, maybe you're reviewing a document, you need input from people, don't do it individually, do these workshops. If you can use a workshop, get the group of people in there all together at once to give you the feedback simultaneously. You're going to find this saves loads of time, right? You can get it done faster. You're going to get discrepancies or contradictions surfaced more quickly. It builds group consensus. They all start to understand the big picture, and if they agree on commonalities, right? Those are all good things that come out of this, right? So anytime you can find a way of saving time, but keep the quality up, go for it. That's what Richard always said. And this is a great way of doing that, is use workshopping techniques whenever you can. Okay, next, identify and track down the unknowns. Now, unknowns, it could be any number of things, right? This could introduce risks. They could be details that are missing on requirements. It could be resources that haven't yet, we need resources, but we haven't identified who or what their skill sets are. All of this introduces potential threats to my project. So Richard said we should try and track these, document them, create a spreadsheet or a table or a database, right? Listing all of the unknown elements, the open questions, we can call them. When we think that information will be known or should be known, if we have a deadline, who's the person who's responsible for finding out the answer and getting that information? Right? If there's nobody assigned, it's not likely going to just suddenly emerge. Very importantly, Not knowing something introduces risks, right? So if we don't know who's going to do the work, there's a risk that we may not have a resource when it comes time to doing the work because we never got somebody assigned, or maybe they don't have the right skills, or they cost more than we expected, right? There's all kinds of risks from having uncertainty. So he's talking about document all of those risks that are caused by this information being unanswered. That's essentially your motivation to go get the answers quickly by looking at the amount of risks that it's causing. You may also identify some mitigating actions. What can we do to minimize those risks until we can eliminate them completely? There may be certain preventative actions we can take, or things to minimize damage. And lastly, you may have some comments or thoughts or status updates or something on these unknowns. So build a little database, build a little spreadsheet, track these, and try and come to clarity as quickly as you can on a project. Try and eliminate these unknowns. You can never have a project, or very rarely can you have a project with no unknowns. There is always uncertainty. Even if the requirements are understood and the technology is understood, there's still the unknowns around human performance. Sometimes people have bad days, sometimes they have good days. Their productivity levels will be different. Their quality levels may vary over time with fatigue. So there are always unknowns on any project. Accept them and plan for it. The next one is identify the acceptance criteria for your project at the time that you gather the requirements. So when somebody says, this is what I need, you ask them, and how will you determine that we've met that need? By what criteria are you going to decide if it's good enough? And document those acceptance criteria. That's really important. If we capture those at the time that we get a requirement, we get how the client is going to assess whether we've met that need. That'll help us identify holes in our requirements, right? So if they say, well, I'm going to assess it by criteria A, B, and C, and you might say, hey, you never mentioned C before. This is a new thing, right? We've got a hole in our requirements. It speeds up design because we can give these acceptance criteria to the people designing the solution, and they can make sure they design it well enough to meet all those criteria the first time, rather than having a design prepared and sending it out for review and then getting all this feedback on the review because we missed stuff. Give them all those acceptance criteria right up front, and they can design it to include all that on the first pass. Then it simplifies testing after we've built something, because these acceptance criteria are how the client is going to determine whether the project has met their needs. So why don't we use those as our own internal tests as well? So we've already validated that the solution is acceptable by the client's own criteria before we hand it over to the client to evaluate. That way there's no surprises. The client never comes back with unexpected feedback. We can objectively measure it and tell them that we've satisfied everything they've looked for. And this reduces barriers to getting the final completed product signed off, right? Because we know it already meets all of their objectives and what they've been looking for based on their own stated criteria. So that's identifying acceptance criteria up front. By the way, this is also a technique in agile project management and is actively captured. Okay, this is what agile people call understanding the definition of done. Right? Getting agreement on what done is before you start. Okay, next, number 12, produce a good plan. Get a good plan in place, a thorough, complete plan, and then go for it. Go execute the plan. They talk about plan the work, work the plan, or plan to execute, execute the plan. Right? Once you've got your clear requirements, the next most important thing for project success is having a really good, thorough plan. You know, some people say project success is 20% hard skills and 80% soft skills, right? The PMI study said 81% of success is the soft skills, right? But planning is probably the main part of that 20% of hard skills, right? That's the biggest part of the hard skills, is getting a good, clear plan in place. That's not just the schedule. It includes the financial plan, the resource plan, testing plans, quality plans, etc. All the different elements of a project plan should be put in place, and that is what makes the project successful is having a really good, clear plan, so we know exactly what we need to do. There's no misunderstandings, and then just execute. Number 13, plan at different levels. Use different planning levels. Now, a couple different ways of interpreting this. Right, we start with a project, and we understand what the project's objectives are. We talked about that, what the high-level objectives and goals of the project are. But at some point when we start planning, we're going to have to figure out how we're going to organize the project. And we may break the project down into a number of phases, or sometimes they're called stages, right? A stage or a phase. And these are usually done in some kind of sequential order. So maybe we initiate the stage one is initiation, where we understand all the business needs and gather all our inputs and do our research. And then stage two or phase two is elaboration, where we drill down on the riskier items and deal with the items of higher priority in more detail to eliminate risks and have better understanding. And then phase three is the actual build or execution phase of the project, where you now go do the project work. And then phase four, the final stage is some kind of transition or commissioning or launch phase, where the deliverables of the project are put into use, right? So you're going to try and figure out how we're going to organize time-wise the different phases of the project, so we can have a phase-based plan. This kind of information is often in the charter, potentially. And then based on the phase, you may take those phases and break each phase down even further into a series of stage deliverables or phase deliverables. These are the main deliverables of this phase. So during a planning phase, you may come up with a timeline and a budget and a risk management plan and stakeholder analysis. There may be an issue log. There may be a number of things that you've identified as deliverables during a planning phase, for example. Now, those deliverables themselves might be preconditions. Completing them and getting them approved and signed off might be preconditions to moving on to the next phase, right? The outputs of one phase might be the deliverables to the next phase. So sometimes these deliverables are prescribed by a methodology or corporate governance standards. There may be all kinds of rules around this stuff. And then each of those deliverables, we plan even further. Each of those deliverables now, we have to figure out how are we going to build those deliverables. And we break each deliverable down into a series of activities or tasks. An activity or task are the steps required to complete the deliverable. So there may be research tasks, there may be documentation or writing tasks, there may be review and inspection tasks, there may be revision tasks, and there'll finally be final review and approval tasks. There may be a series of tasks that are needed to get a deliverable done. So we need to understand all those activities. Now, number 14, Richard said we should probably follow this 9-step planning process to actually do this, right? So we're going to start with defining the stages or phases of the project. Then we're going to produce something called a PBS, or product breakdown structure, that identifies all of the deliverables within the project. Then we describe the content of those deliverables. What are the expectations for completeness? What, as we said, come up with a table of contents for a document. Describe what's in and out of scope, right? That's defining the content, step 3. Step 4, now produce the work breakdown structure, or the set of tasks on how to do those activities. And then you produce a network, and we do estimating and assign resources, and this turns into a schedule, and ultimately we create a completed project plan. There's 9 steps to project planning. So let's actually look at each one of those steps. So the first one, step 1, identify major phases or stages and major phase or stage deliverables. What are the major pieces? So in a house construction example, right, the phases are requirements definition, designing the house, building the house, and finally acceptance or sign off of the house. And what are the products at the end? So the requirements definition, we should have a detailed requirements document. During the design phase, at the end of that, we're gonna, how we know we're done? We've got house plans or drawings, maybe a site plan and elevations and floor plans of the house, a set of blueprints, right? What about the build phase? How will you know you're done? Because the house construction is complete. And what about the acceptance stage? Well, the owner's done a walkthrough and they've accepted the house. There's no outstanding issues. Maybe the building inspector has come by and looked at it and given you an occupancy permit, right? So those can be the end of stage products. IT projects, we have some other examples on the right. There may be a number of phases or stages on a project, and they may vary based on the type of project. You may have different phases in any kind of project, and what you need to do is determine what deliverables need to be produced to signify the end of that phase or stage. So that's step one. Step two, now that we've identified all these high-level deliverables, do a product breakdown structure. Break the products into smaller and smaller pieces until you've got stuff that you can complete within a reasonable period of time, right? So we talk about the 90% complete syndrome. That happens when you have poorly defined products, right? So you don't have all the details yet. So sometimes you think you're 90% complete, there's just a little bit left, but sometimes those little pieces, as you start working on them, expand into larger and larger bits, and there's all these elements. Oh, I forgot this, and oh, I forgot that. And it takes forever to complete that last 10%. To get that final completion sometimes is most of the work. I had somebody once tell me that the longest part of a project is its final sign off and completion, not because we're waiting for people to sign, because we're waiting for people to fix all the little variances, all the little defects and things like that could be niggling. You know, the Japanese have a saying, they're saying, I'd rather have it 80% right today than 100% right tomorrow, because tomorrow may never come, right? That final perfection is costly and takes a long time. So if you break things into small pieces, then it's easier to measure progress. If I say, how long is a piece of work? And you say, well, I don't know, it's going to take me about 3 months. So if I ask you, how are things going for the first month, you probably say, yeah, it's pretty good. We're making progress. Second month, how are we doing? Oh, pretty good, pretty good. You get to the third month, how are we doing? Oh, well, it's a little bit harder than I thought. I'm suddenly a little bit behind. That's where you usually find the slippage. And when you have big items, you find out about it near the end. And it's that 90% complete syndrome. At 90% of the way through the project, what are you doing? You're probably doing your final touch-ups, your final testing, and you're finding mistakes. And what do? You have to react to those mistakes. You got to go back and maybe fix the design, rebuild some stuff, retest some stuff. There's going to be rework involved. And so, we don't go back. We don't say we were 90%, but now we're back to 20% because I had to change the design. That looks strange, right? You can't go backwards. You can't stay where you are and just say 90%, 90%, 90% week after week, because it looks like you're not doing anything, and you're still trying to finish the project. So then you get into the situation where you're trying to move forward, but you're moving forward in tiny baby steps near the end. 90%, 90.5, 90.6, 90.613. You get smaller and smaller steps because you're running out of room, right? So you have to change the number to show you're moving forward, right? Because that's true. You are getting closer to completion, but you don't know how many more issues or defects you're going to find, so you don't want to jump ahead too fast. Right? So we got to break the products down into smaller pieces. Now, the products of the project can include management deliverables, project management deliverables, our project plans, our status reports, our budgets, right? Our stakeholder registers. All of these project management deliverables are deliverables that must be produced by my project. There's also technical deliverables, the ones that are the work of the project, the main work, the main outputs of the project that the business is looking for, not the deliverables to manage that work, but the work itself, right? So if you're building an airplane, there'd be the specifications and drawings of the airplane, your design documents, your QA reviews, the constructed plane itself, right? There's technical deliverables. There's also quality deliverables we need to produce, right? How do we manage the quality of the solution? There's going to be defect lists and checklists to make sure sign-offs and checklists, inspection reports, quality management plans, things like that to make sure that the deliverables, the technical deliverables, were produced with quality. So all of these are defined in the product breakdown. So if I say I have to build a house, yes, I'm going to have windows, doors, chimney, and things like that, but there's also going to be the site plan, the blueprints, those have to be produced as part of my house project. There might be defects I need to correct as part of my house. I may have contaminated soil I have to remove before I build the house, or an old shed, rotting shed that I need to tear down and get out of the way, right? So there may be defects I need to do. There'll be other documentation. If I'm building some very fancy custom, ground sourced, deep earth heat pump system in the house, I may need to leave behind some operation instructions for the new owner because they won't know how to turn it on or work with it. It's something they've never seen before. So there may be documents I have to produce as well. So all of this becomes part of the scope of the project. That's step 2, develop the product breakdown structure. Break the product down into its constituent bits and pieces. Next, develop standards for these products. As I mentioned this earlier, right? So if you have a document, for example, prepare a table of contents or a topical outline for the document so we know what all the sections are that are needed. What I like to do is create a shell, not just the table of contents, but a shell. So I have a table of contents for the document, but then I create all the headings and subheadings within the document. And under each section, I put a little comment. I say, this section is expected to be 2 to 3 pages long. This other section, it will be a page long, but will include a graph, a pie chart showing the distribution of responses to the questionnaire. I start to give people an expectation of what's coming, because then they can look at that and tell me, is that acceptable or not? Because they might give me feedback. They say, wow, that's probably 10 pages on that one topic. That's probably too much. I don't need that information here. But this other area, I don't think you're going into enough depth with what your description is. I think you need to explore that a bit further, right? So you can start to play with it. Before you sit down and start writing the document, you should have clarity exactly on what the expectations are for completion. Next, develop a work breakdown for each structure. So once we've broken down the product with the product breakdown, now we got to figure out the tasks or activities. How are you going to do the work? So the product breakdown defines what we need to do. The work breakdown defines and how are we going to get those things done, right? So the work breakdown are the activities and tasks needed to get the work done. They form the basis of what we estimate. We don't estimate products, we estimate the work required to build the products. So it's the basis of our estimates and our scheduling. So for example, if we're breaking down some work for a deliverable, maybe it's a document, we could prepare the document draft, hand it over for review, then somebody else reviews and comments on the draft, then we rework the draft to address their comments, then they review the revised draft to make sure we address their comments properly, and if everything's okay, we can agree on the final version. So these are the steps, the tasks, the activities that are needed to get a deliverable done. And any deliverable, you can probably break it down into several steps. Okay, that's step 4, the work breakdown structure. Step 5, now that we've identified all those tasks through the work breakdown structure, build a dependency network. Figure out which tasks are dependent on others being done first. The output of A is an input to B, so there's a dependency relationship. So organize these tasks, right, in order, respecting these dependencies, right? So sometimes you can do this with Post-it notes on a whiteboard or on a cork board with little strings. Sometimes we do this with software, but figure out the order that these tasks need to be completed and the dependencies between them, right? This tells us the process we must follow to get the work done, who's dependent on who else, right? Which items have to be done first. Then establish the criteria for each on how we're going to estimate each task. That's where things get a little bit funny, right? Some tasks are effort driven and some are duration driven. What does that mean? An effort driven task means if we put more people on the job, the task will get done faster. A duration driven task means doesn't matter how many people we have working on this, it's going to take however long it takes. I like to use the example of the Make a Baby project, right? We could assign 9 women to the Make a Baby project, but that doesn't mean the baby's going to come in 1 month, right? It's going to take 9 months to get that baby. So that's the idea. The Make a Baby project is duration driven, not effort driven. Whereas something else like painting a room, if I have 9 women painting a room versus 1 woman, the job will get done 9 times faster. That's an effort driven activity. So we need to understand the difference between effort and duration. Now we got to figure out what are our constraints for these elements, right? Are we resource constrained, right? If we have very few people, then we can estimate effort or duration and negotiate maybe using fewer resources may lengthen the overall duration, or we can cut the scope to try and get it done within the constraints that we have with the resources we have. Maybe we can play around. If we're limited in dollars, we can use less costly resources to try and save costs. There's things that we can play with, but we need to understand what our estimating criteria are for each item and what our strategy is. Do we estimate cost? Do we estimate effort? Are we estimating duration? What are the elements we're looking at? Step 7. Now, once we understand how much work is required, let's start assigning resources. Now, different individuals, right, if we're using people as a resource, not just equipment, different individuals are going to have different levels of productivity, different attitudes, different skill levels, different quality levels, different behaviors. So make sure you take all of that into account. You want the right people on the team. If you remember, step 1 of these killer ideas was to get the right team together and build a good team working model. That's hard to do when one person on the team has a poisonous attitude or is sociopathic towards the others, right? You got to make sure that you've got a good working relationship. And so consider things like attitude and behavior, not just their skill level when choosing people for the team. As Richard was famous for saying, he'd rather have the person with the right attitude but lacking experience than somebody with tons of experience but a bad attitude. It's going to go so much easier. You can train people without experience. That experience can be learned. You can develop it over time. You can train and learn skills. But a bad attitude sometimes is just the way the person is, and you don't want to have to deal with that. So consider all these elements when you put the team together. Also consider culture, right? The different cultures, linguistic capabilities and stuff on the team. Try to get a good working mix across the group. Step 8. Now that you've got all of my tasks sequenced, I've got the dependencies figured out, I've built that network, right? And I've assigned resources and I've done my estimating. Now I can prepare the schedule. So the duration or the schedule is calculated, right? We don't estimate duration for labor-driven activities. We calculate it. For things like drying concrete, right? That's a duration-driven task. You just figure out the duration and you write it in, right? You estimate the duration and write it in. But for effort-driven activities, like labor-driven things, remember the 9 women can paint a room faster than 1 woman, then we can calculate duration just with some simple math, right? We get the estimated effort for the activity in days or hours, divide it by the number of resources, and that's going to give us roughly how much time it's going to take. Very simple little formula, right? So if it's going to take 1 person, 9 days to paint the room, but if we get 9 people working on it, it's going to take 1 day, right? So we can just do the math and divide it out. Now we've got a schedule. We've got all our activities estimated. We've got the network figured out, the dependencies. We've put the durations in. Now we can build a schedule. But remember, not everybody works at the same level of efficiency. And we need to smooth out our resources, because if you build a network based on what I've already told you, you might find that there are days when people are overutilized, right? They're going to be working 20-hour days to get all the work done that you've scheduled, or they might be underutilized. There may be days where they're only working 3 hours a day and you've got tons and tons of spare room left in the day. So how do we fix that? You make adjustments to the schedule. This is called resource loading or resource leveling, right? So you smooth out the resources, you move the schedule around so you don't overwork or underwork people. Now, there's software that can do this work for you automatically. I find sometimes the software does screwy things when you just trust it blindly to do the job. I always like to tweak it, and I end up in the end doing it manually anyway to get something that I like. But try to avoid starting something, start task A, then abandon it to start task B, then go back to task A for a bit, then start task C, then go back to task B. You know, what you're going to find is a lot of loss of productivity and confusion from all this splitting things up so you can try and level the resources. Resource leveling or smoothing is not as important as avoiding over multitasking. Just take a look at the graph on the screen. Study was done. It showed the average employee is about 70% productive. If you give somebody one thing to work on, about 70% of their time is actually working on that. What happens with the rest? Checking voicemail, checking email, going to the bathroom, talking to colleagues about the weekend. The other 30%, just checking voicemail and email, can take up more than 30% of your day. So one person's about 70% productive, heads down, getting work done. Good. So let's give somebody a second activity. Well, their productivity goes up about 10%. Why? Because if I'm blocked on task A, I can work on task B in the meantime while I'm waiting for task A to get unblocked. So there's less downtime. So my productivity goes up. It doesn't go up to 100 because there's still, you know, voicemails and emails and things like that to deal with. Then I'm at 80%. Let's try and get it higher. Let's add a third task. Well, you add a third task, your productivity drops down to below the original level. And the more tasks you keep adding on, the more and more unproductive people become because of the impact of interruptions. All this task switching has a cost, right? It impacts our productivity. There was a study done that showed if you have, they gave people 5 activities that took exactly 8 hours. It took exactly 8 hours to get this work done. So they gave them these 5 8-hour activities. Now, if you did these in order of priority and you only worked 8 hours a day, you'd get one done Monday, one Tuesday, one Wednesday, right? By Friday, all 5 would be done. But they had to actually work on each of the 8-hour activities every day. So they had to work on all 5 activities in parallel every single day. And what they found was it took till Wednesday afternoon, the second week, a 60%, almost 60% cost and schedule overrun to get the same amount of work done as if they had just done it in order of priority and not multitasked. They would have been done in 5 days. It took them in 1 week. It took them till Wednesday, the second week, to get the same amount of work done. Why? Because of these impacts of interruptions. Every time you switch from task A to task B, you're going to be in a zone where you're thinking, well, hold on a sec, what was task B again? I got trying to remember, right? It takes you a while to get your brain back in the groove, back in, you know, task B land, so you can remember task B. Oh yeah, I remember what that is now. Okay, then you do your work on task B, you come back to task A, you're like, what was I thinking again? I can't remember. Oh, now I've been so interrupted. It's going to take you a while to get back in the zone, right? To get back into your focused state. So too much multitasking can be bad, right? You want to be careful about that. Okay, number 24, plan activities to last no longer than 5 to 10 days, a week or two, right? 5 to 10 days is weekdays, right? So that's work day. So that's the 1 to 2 weeks. Keep everything shorter than 1 to 2 weeks. Why? Well, people are more accurate estimating short durations. because less stuff can go wrong. If I say this is going to take me about 2 hours to do, that's more accurate than me to saying, yeah, it's going to take me about 98 hours to do. How do you know? How do you know? That's so far away, the number could be way off. We're more accurate estimating small numbers, right? So 5 to 10 days, that's something I can get my head wrapped around. You start going, 4 weeks, 8 weeks, you're less accurate now because there's more opportunity for things to go wrong in the interim. The shorter periods, less time for things to make your estimates less accurate. I can also independently measure whether we're on track or not. If I say, oh, something will take 22 months, then I ask you partway through, how are we doing? Oh yeah, I'm making progress, but how do you know? It's very subjective, right? But if I'm saying, how long is it going to take? And you'll say a week, and at the end of the week, it's done or it's not. If you say something takes 6 weeks, if I have nothing to show until the end of 6 weeks, then for 5 weeks, I'm running blind. I have no feedback on whether we're on track or not. But if I can break that thing into smaller bits that can be done, instead of in 6 weeks, I can break it into 6 one-week pieces of work. And at the end of 1 week, I say, hey, how you doing? Oh yeah, I'm done, I'm on time, great. Week 2, how about now? Yeah, I'm done this week's work too. What about week 3? How you doing? Yeah, I'm on track, I've done this piece of work. You're getting a much more granular sense of a progress that you're making, and better confidence. You're boosting morale and boosting confidence because people can see the progress is being made, right? They can see they're having a regular string of successes. So that's all good stuff. So break your work down into 1 to 2 week elements, right? Next, come up with some clear criteria on when something needs to be broken down further into these 5 to 10 day elements, right? So for example, if a document is going to take you more than 10 days to get it done, maybe we define the chapters as separate deliverables, as like sub deliverables, right? Break it down, the deliverable, the product breakdown structure needs to go down another level deeper. So break things down smaller into the underlying pieces. So each chapter might be a deliverable. And now those individual chapters can be done in a week or 2, right? So break things down into smaller pieces. If the person responsible for a piece of work changes, create a new element. That's a great key. It's time to break something down further. So if we're doing our work breakdown into tasks, right, and say the overall task is going to take you, say, 14 days, that's bigger than the 5 to 10 day rule. So let's actually break it down into the individual tasks based on responsibilities. So the author writes the first draft. It's going to take them 8 days. That's a task. That's less than 5 to 10, right? Or within that range. Number 2, review the draft and provide comments. Who's going to do that? Not the author. It's going to be some reviewers. So responsibility is shifted. So that's an indication this might be another activity. Great place to break it down. So there's 3 more days. And then they give it the comments back to the author, and the author needs to revise the draft for a couple days and then send it back to the PM to issue this agreed specification. There's different tasks here with different task owners. That's a great way of signaling it's time to break it down, another step. Okay, those are my first 25 killer ideas for delivering successful projects that I got from Richard Morreale's book. And on January 28th, 2 weeks from now, I'm going to give you more killer ideas for delivering successful projects. It'll be the second part to this webinar series at noon Eastern time on that date. Now, wherever you found out about this webinar, wherever you signed up for this webinar, the same source will give you the links and stuff to sign up for part 2. So please sign up right away before you forget for part 2 of this webinar, more killer ideas for delivering successful projects. I'm Kevin Aguanno. It was great talking to you. I'm going to take questions now. And while we're doing that, I just want to remind you, we do issue these webinars or complete these webinars every 2 weeks throughout the year. Actually, a little bit less than 2 weeks because we have there's 26 2-week periods in the year, but we're delivering 29 webinars in 2023. So we actually have some bonus ones thrown in there as well. And we may add a couple more as the year progresses. Okay, so just type your questions into the chat window. Excellent. Type your questions into the chat window. Now, for those of you who are viewing the recording of this webinar on YouTube at a later date, obviously you won't be able to enter questions, and you probably don't know what date this More Killer Ideas thing is going to be. That's irrelevant. It'll probably be recorded and posted on YouTube as well. So you just may want to search there for part 2. Okay, first question is from Camilla. She asks, is there software we should be using to plan our projects? Well, great question. My answer is there is software that will help you organize your plans for projects and do some of the technical work of planning a project. But, you know, there's a famous old saying, garbage in, garbage out. If you don't understand how to do planning, then a tool, if you don't understand basic planning, a tool is just going to have you do bad planning faster, right? The tool will automate you making mistakes and building bad plans, so they're going to happen faster. So I don't recommend people who are just starting out to project management using fancy tools until after they have some practice actually using the techniques, building schedules, doing estimating, doing risk analysis, because sometimes we have a false sense of complacency with the tools themselves. Many people, I say, how are you managing the project? They say, well, I'm using Microsoft Project. Well, that's a piece of software for building a schedule. I said, how are you managing the project? With the software. The software doesn't manage the project. People manage the project. The software just gives them some visualizations, some reports and things that might be helpful, but it's still a person making decisions and coming up with alternatives and looking at whether things are on track and making decisions based on that. So, I think that we should always learn how to do something without fancy tools first, and then once we get the hang of it, we're going to be able to use the tools more efficiently and effectively to do it the right way. Okay, excellent. We have time for one more question. Okay, Carl, do I get PDUs for this? Yes, absolutely. If you're a project manager certified by the Project Management Institute, PMI, you can claim professional development units or PDUs for watching this event. It's a 1-hour webinar. You can collect 1 PDU, 1 professional development unit. Also, if you are in a number of other professions, you can claim continuing education credits or recertification credits or whatever your group calls them. You may be able to claim them for this event if your profession requires you to have some project management skill or knowledge. Then this would qualify you likely for earning those credits. My name's Kevin Aguanno. It was great talking to you today. My phone number and email address are on the screen. Feel free to reach out if you ever have any questions about material that we talked about during this webinar. It was great talking to you. Hope you have a great year, and I'll see you on part 2 of this webinar in a couple weeks. Thank you. Bye for now.